The Department of Justice just issued subpoenas on a sitting governor, attorney general, and multiple mayors, not because they broke the law, but because they criticized the actions of the executive. In Trump's America, dissent itself is investigated as a potential crime. I feel like every week I'm repeating myself by saying this is unprecedented, but this is unprecedented federal escalation. Trump's Department of Justice has now issued grand jury subpoenas on Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, and other state and local officials. And the Department of Justice is claiming that these officials may have obstructed federal immigration enforcement. But the key details is none of the subpoenas have any allegation of physical interference. None of them claim that they blocked ICE operations, and the probe hinges on a conspiracy statute based on speech, statements, and lack of cooperation. The government is now policing the speech of elected officials, not their actions, not what they demand from enforcement that they are in charge of. It is their speech alone. This article from PBS lays it out clearly that this is not about actions, it is about words. Federal prosecutors served 6 grand jury subpoenas Tuesday to Minnesota officials as part of an investigation into whether they obstructed or impeded federal law enforcement during a sweeping immigration operation in the Minneapolis St. Paul area, a person familiar with the matter said. The subpoenas are related to an investigation into whether Minnesota officials obstructed federal immigration enforcement through public statements. I repeat, public statements that they made. 2 people familiar with the matter said Friday. They said then that it was focused on the potential violation of a conspiracy statute. It has to be emphasized that this is an attempt to redefine dissent as criminal. Historically, obstruction has always meant blocking ICE agents, destroying evidence, interfering with arrests. But the Department of Justice is now saying that any public criticism of ICE is part of a criminal conspiracy. They are demanding statements, emails, communication, public messaging, all in an effort to pin this on a global network of left wing agitators. Slate puts it bluntly that the Trump's Justice Department has quietly redefined dissent as a form of extremism and terrorism. This is not subtle. This is not an accident. This is intentional, and it is designed to chill speech, especially from elected officials in an opposition party. On this week's episode of Amicus, Mark Joseph Stern spoke with Julia Gegenheimer about the rapidly expanding definition of terrorism, obstruction, and other charges that the government is weaponizing against political opponents. Gegenheimer is a special litigation counsel at Georgetown Law's Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection and previously served at the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. An excerpt from their conversation below has been edited for length and clarity. This is really important information, and I highly suggest you listen to this or read it on Slate itself. But I do want to emphasize this excerpt from the conversation. Even then, domestic terrorism is not itself a federal crime. You have to have an underlying federal criminal violation. Then these additional layers of motivation or intent stack on top of it. So the impact of throwing this term around very loosely is to threaten criminal punishment for conduct that falls far, far short of what federal law would actually look at as domestic terrorism. That's an important excerpt that I think flies under the radar of a lot of people looking into this story. But domestic terrorism is not a charge in and of itself. It is something that is added on to an already federal violation. You have to commit a crime, and then it's deemed whether or not that crime was domestic terrorism. You can't just immediately label someone as a domestic terrorist or say you committed domestic terrorism without an initial charge to add on top of that. But the Trump administration doesn't care about any of that. Trump officials have repeatedly labeled Minnesota leaders and protesters as domestic terrorists, radicals, extremists, aiding criminals, opponents of the government. Legal and civil experts have warned that when the state labels people as terrorists, it marks them as legitimate targets. It normalizes violence that's committed on them, and it encourages vigilante thinking. If I am someone who is a proud patriot and my president is telling me that these people are agitators that are a part of a left wing conspiracy and network, what is going to stop those people from committing actions that protect their country? This is going to inspire so much civil unrest, specifically pitting civilians against each other. Experts say that this type of language isn't just reckless, but this is historically what governments have said to justify repression of their own people. We've seen this throughout history, even recent history. When you put people in opposition like that, when you portray them as the enemy, when you describe them as kind of threatening a person's way of life or things that they hold dear, that creates the conditions under which people are more likely to resort to political violence. and it becomes more and more the norm, Gegenheimer said. You cannot tell people that an innocent civilian that's protesting is a terrorist and then pretend like you're not inciting violence on those civilians. We know that ICE has conducted raids on high schools in Minnesota, and there's been recent increased activity, aggressive enforcement, raids near workplaces and transit, and fear that continues to spread among immigrant communities. This is not theoretical. This is a lived crisis, and local leaders are responding to their constituents to try to offer some semblance of representation. Even some local businesses are trying to offer some sense of symbolic community. This story comes from ABC that talks about a toy store that is giving out whistles in order to empower communities to notify when ICE is in the area.
So, Mischief of one kind or another, St. Paul Toy Store, Mischief Toys, is supporting its community by creating and handing out free 3D printed whistles for those protesting ICE in Minnesota. The goal is to alert neighbors when immigration and customs enforcement agents are nearby. But these whistles are also a form of protest in more ways than one. They've been seeing and hearing them used by demonstrators to create a nonviolent ruckus at demonstrations. Joining me now, the co-owner of Mischief Toy Store, Abigail Adelschein Marshall. Abigail, good to see you. So, how did this start, and what's the response been from the community?
Yeah, so the idea of whistles started, to my knowledge, in Chicago when I started really cracking down there. And it was really designed to be a nonviolent form of protest and to alert everyone around that there's ICE activity going on. We started handing them out right after Thanksgiving. And at first, we were handing out a few hundred a week. This last week, we've handed out over 2,000 ever since the killing of Renee Good. I think everyone is looking for anything they can do to help their community right now. And the whistles are just one small thing that they can do.
Wow. Well, ICE did release a statement on Tuesday, seemingly aimed at your efforts. I want to get your response. The statement says your whistles won't stop or hinder ICE from arresting criminal, illegal aliens, sex abusers, murderers, gang members, and more off of Minnesota's streets. What's your response?
That ICE is doing far more to hurt our community than immigrants ever have. And I can't overstate how much our entire community is being terrorized by ICE right now. We have almost every customer who comes in will tell us about encounters they've had with ICE, be that immigrant families or Minnesotan born and bred families, grandparents, veterans. They'll tell us about ICE encounters they've had. And it's really impossible to avoid. Every corner you go around, you could be running into ICE. And that's part of why the whistles are so important. And we're far from the only business who hands them out, but it helps create community and give people something to do. People are organizing grocery deliveries to help immigrant families and those at risk. And it really feels like no one is safe in Minneapolis right now from ICE agents, because we've seen that they don't really hold themselves accountable to the laws, and there's not really any federal or local accountability for their actions. And it's really scary, but the community is coming together.
So let me ask you, clearly whistles are a very peaceful form of protest. You're using them as an alert system as well. With the shooting of Renee Good and other incidents that we have covered here on the news that have happened in your state, are you worried about increased confrontations with ICE will put more people at risk?
Yes, I'm absolutely worried. But you also can't really avoid confrontations. If your apartment building's getting raided and your neighbors are getting kidnapped at gunpoint, you just don't have much choice. We've heard stories of single parents being taken and leaving their kids just alone at home. So there's not much choice, that we need to do what we can to resist ICE and to help our community, because we are all in danger right now.
Co-owner of Mischief Toys, Abigail Adelschein Marshall. I hope kids are still coming in for other toys as well, for
They are.
peaceful play at home. Good. That's good to hear. But it's truly interesting to follow your efforts and how many people, the thousands of people that have been coming for your whistles. Abigail, thank you for your time.
2,000 whistles is insane, but it really goes to show that this is building community when people feel like they have no hope because the federal government is acting like it can do whatever it wants and not even cooperating with state or local law enforcement. People have to find community and hope elsewhere. And they're doing it together. They're doing it by protecting their neighbors. They're doing it by community policing. And they're doing it by making sure that ICE agents are being observed as they are committing crimes. So it is documented and it is witnessed. It's so important to also highlight how stupid of a response that is from ICE. I've talked about this many times and I'll talk about it again. People that are committing violent crimes, people that are drug trafficking, there are agencies and departments that already handle those crimes. The FBI, the DEA, these are government agencies that are specifically designed to handle those crimes. ICE is not meant to do that. ICE is immigration, customs, and enforcement meant to take anybody who doesn't have paperwork and run up those numbers. When over 80% of those that are detained have zero violent criminal record, miss me with that bullshit of ICE saying that they're trying to stop criminals from invading these communities and people handing out whistles is impeding the progress of them getting violent criminals off the street. Fuck all of that. That is all false. ICE is not meant to do that at all. ICE was created in 2003 in a post 9/11 United States where we were the most heightened in our paranoia ever. And the agency is meant to demonstrate how powerful the state is at punishing those that it views as opponents. It is a fear mechanism. It is a fear tactic. It is not about safety. It is not about security. It is not about protecting communities. Because as this woman said, they do more harm to communities than any immigrant has ever done. But ICE doesn't care who they terrorize, and they don't care that these communities are demanding that they leave their neighborhoods. Hours after that ABC interview that we just watched aired, two ICE agents arrived at the door of Mischief Toy Store. So the agents were asking for I-9 documents, which prove people are legal to work in this country from the store's employees. Marshall said the store has been audited for various things in the past, but this was different. For starters, the notice listed the store by its name rather than by its legal name, Mischief LLC, which has been used in every other government document the store has received. Also, Marshall said, he was alerted to previous audits by mail, not by in person agents. In 27 years of being retailers in St. Paul, we've never been audited for this. We have 5 part time employees and 3 owners. So tell me why they want to waste time on 5 part time employees. But here we are. So they didn't even look into the official documentation of the store. ICE agents saw the ABC interview and decided, you know what, we're going to go pay them a visit. Any small bit of research would have showed them that Mischief LLC was the name, and the fact that that was not on the documents just shows that they are doing this out of pocket. They are doing this by the hip. Anytime they see somebody that is slightly dissenting or initiating community support against ICE, they want to have full retaliation against. This is very clear intimidation. Just warning your neighbors of ICE activity is something that the government now wants to monitor. The only thing that allows this to continue is the funding that is dumped into ICE. And this article from Politico says that Congress clinches $1.2 trillion in funding for DHS, Pentagon, and domestic agencies. House and Senate leaders are trying to clear the package before January 30th shutdown deadline. After the fatal shooting by an ICE agent in Minneapolis this month, congressional Democrats have demanded that any new DHS funding come with conditions to crack down on the Trump administration's immigration enforcement tactics, even as many Democratic voters call for defunding the agency. The final compromise would keep ICE funded at $10 billion for the fiscal year that ends in September, while reducing the agency's budget for enforcement and removal efforts. It would mandate that the DHS use $20 million to outfit immigration enforcement agents with body cameras, direct the department to give officers more training on diffusing conflict while interacting with the public, and provide $20 million for independent oversight of DHS detention facilities. These are not reforms that anybody should be celebrating over. Body cams and de-escalation training, we're still seeing ICE terrorize people, specifically in Minneapolis. There's no slowdown to the enforcement that is continuing in major cities where there are high immigrant populations. And the Department of Justice escalation only continues, subpoenaing sitting governors and attorney generals for their political speech. None of this is stopping. And all we're doing is continuing to fund them by $10 billion? Really? So Congress will continue to fund this crackdown and further escalation. But when it comes to stopping political intimidation, all of a sudden, nobody's in charge. Nobody can do anything. But we know when institutions fail, community is the one to step up. This is done through mutual aid, where community members are helping one another as they have financial insecurity. We're seeing demonstrations where folks are showing that they have shared principles and convictions when it comes to wanting a better future. And what we saw with the toy store, where people are providing essentials in order to notify neighbors when there is ICE activity patrolling their neighborhoods and ripping people from their homes. This article from The Guardian talks about what the next step is in strategic economic disruption. Economic blackout day planned in Minnesota to protest ICE surge. Unions, faith groups, and local leaders urge residents not to work, shop, or go to school after the killing of Renee Good. A blackout by workers can send a message, Knutson said. Those of us in the trade union movement understand the leverage and power that our labor has, and we are going to try and use that. Because really, there's nothing else left, he told The Guardian. The idea that we use our collective power to show those that rule this country and those that profit off of our labor that there's a cost to attacking our communities this way. On Friday, January 23rd, we're calling for a day of truth and freedom. There is an unprecedented and outrageous attack being waged against the people of Minnesota. I've never seen anything like that in my life, said Kieran Knutson, the president of Communications Workers of America, Local 7250 in Minneapolis. This is an outrageous acceleration and escalation of violence toward working class people. Economic disruption is the only way to hit those in positions of power where it hurts, which is economic productivity. This is the most successful way that people can demonstrate their opposition to the government. Economic disruption is always the most successful way to protest non-violently. And the administration will either have to concede and give in to the demands to stop ICE escalation, or they will have to double down on the repression of their own people, which will then highlight the authoritarian nature of the Trump regime even further. I didn't think that was possible, but it will do it even further. A Department of Homeland Security spokesperson said the fact that those groups want to shut down Minnesota's economy, which provides law-abiding American citizens an honest living, to fight for illegal alien murderers, rapists, gang members, pedophiles, drug dealers, and terrorists, says everything you need to know. The spokesperson reiterated the administration's claim that Good weaponized her car before the shooting. These people don't live in reality. Again, we have mechanisms and we have law enforcement that is meant to tackle actual violent crime. But people not having proper paperwork, even if they are economic contributors, even if they have community roots, those are not people that we should be taking and putting in detention facilities. One, it's just a misuse of federal resources. And two, we don't treat civil violations that way. We believe in proportional responses to what behaviors are. If somebody does not have proper paperwork, if somebody has committed a civil violation, if somebody is littered on the ground, if somebody has parked illegally, we know that the response should be proportional. We don't arrest people for parking illegally. We don't take somebody into jail for littering on the street. And when people don't have paperwork, we don't need to violently rip them from communities. If there are single parents and all of a sudden they're taken by ICE, those children just go home and they're left alone for who knows how long. Sometimes there are weeks or months without any communication between those that are detained and their family members. Everybody knows that this is unjust. If you are a Republican out there and you say that you love ICE, you are doing the craziest mental gymnastics to try to justify being a limited government conservative and justifying ICE ripping people from their homes. We need more economic blackouts. We need more labor unions, faith leaders, community organizers that are demanding that people participate in this defiance of an authoritarian regime. If elected leaders can be subpoenaed for their political speech, what does that mean for activists? What does that mean for civilians, journalists, ordinary people who are demanding change from their own government? We're supposed to live in a representative democracy. And if we're not properly being represented, we have every right to demand that change happens. And if they can do this to people in positions of power, sitting governors, attorney generals, mayors, local and state officials, they can do it to you. This is more than just an immigration issue. This is about whether or not political dissent is legal in a free democracy. If the Department of Justice recognizes your criticism of the government as conspiracy, they cannot lie to you and say that this is a democracy.